get to know each other very, very well. You go through the good times, you go through the bad times, both personally, but also within a relationship as well. And, I think if you can come out of that stronger and, learn, as I said, things about yourself.
The world has long been captivated by the legacy of Princess Diana, but now a revelation has shaken the monarchy to its core. During a tense court proceeding, Princess Catherine reportedly collapsed after a shocking DNA test confirmed Diana's final secret, one that had remained hidden for decades. The dramatic moment left the courtroom in silence and raised questions that could forever alter the royal family's history. So, what devastating truth did this test uncover, and why was Catherine so overwhelmed by the revelation it carried? The blood that spoke in silence. What began as an ordinary day for Princess Catherine quickly unfolded into one of the most unsettling chapters of her life. Inside the quiet walls of the palace's private medical wing, she had expected nothing more than a routine health check, the kind she had faced many times before. Royals were accustomed to discretion in such matters. Tests, treatments, and even health scares were always cloaked in silence. For Catherine, this was just another formality, another tick on a long list of duties that demanded her discipline and composure. Yet as the consultation began, something subtle but deeply unsettling caught her attention. Among the pages of medical notes, a single line stood out: DNA confirmation required. It was clinical, cold, detached, but it didn't read like standard procedure. Catherine was no stranger to medical jargon, and though DNA testing wasn't unheard of, the phrasing gnawed at her. It felt deliberate, purposeful, wrong. In that instant, her instincts, the same quiet intuition she had relied upon in the most fragile moments of her life, screamed that this was no ordinary examination. With her characteristic grace, Catherine asked the doctors why such a test was necessary at this time. Her words were calm, almost casual, but her heart carried a sharper edge. The answers came quickly, almost too quickly. They assured her it was only routine, part of a broader checkup, nothing to worry about. But reassurance without conviction is easy to detect, and Catherine saw through them. Their eyes, averted, shifting, hesitating, told a story their mouths dared not speak. The room grew heavier with each passing second. Silence, dense and suffocating, seemed to press against the walls. Catherine noticed fleeting exchanges between the staff, the kind of glances people share when they are bound by knowledge, too dangerous to say aloud. Every gesture, every pause, every breath gave her reason to believe she was no longer in control of her own narrative. When the needle pierced her skin and the vial filled with her blood, Catherine's unease deepened. She watched as the sample was sealed with an almost ritualistic precision. Unlike other times, this one was checked, rechecked, and carried away, as though it contained something sacred or explosive. The secrecy was more than caution. It was urgent. It was fear. And in that moment, Catherine realized she was no longer just a patient. She was part of something far larger, something hidden, something that carried the weight of history. A thought pushed its way to the front of her mind, unwelcome, unshakable, and terrifying in its simplicity. Could this be about Diana? The name lingered like a ghost in the sterile air of the medical wing. Diana, whose legacy had haunted the monarchy for decades, whose truth had never fully been told. Catherine knew that if the test carried her shadow, the consequences would reach far beyond her own life. What the doctors weren't saying was louder than their every word. And for Catherine, the silence was more frightening than any answer. So what if the secret running through Catherine's veins wasn't just blood, but history itself? Could Diana's shadow truly live on within her? Stay. Diana's shadow in the blood. The thought refused to leave her. Dark, insistent, and impossible to silence, it circled Catherine's mind like an echo that would not fade. She had always known she was living in Diana's shadow. How could she not? Diana was more than a memory. She was a legend, a woman who embodied both light and sorrow, who had walked into history not as a queen, but as something far more powerful.
Nice to just keep in touch with everybody, or go out shopping with a girlfriend who wants to buy something and wants me to come along.
Her brilliance, her beauty, her tragedies. None of it had ever truly left the palace. For Catherine, the connection had never been just about marrying William. It was deeper, almost haunting. Both she and Diana had been thrust into a life neither had chosen, expected to wear composure like armor, to smile while carrying private storms. They were bound by duty, by the crown's relentless expectations, by the silent weight of a role that left little room for choice. Catherine had always felt that tie, but now it seemed as though Diana's presence was no longer just symbolic. This time, it felt real, reaching out from beyond the grave with a force Catherine could not ignore. The sealed blood sample, the nervous movements of the doctors, the urgency wrapped in secrecy. It all seemed too intentional, too carefully guarded to dismiss. Every detail carried the sense of a plan, something orchestrated. And for Catherine, the fear was not only about herself, but about what these hidden forces might be trying to bring into the light. In the days that followed, unease settled over her like a heavy cloak. What had begun as a quiet suspicion grew into a storm of whispers. They came not from officials or courtiers who lived at the center of power, but from the unseen voices of the palace, the staff who moved silently in corridors, the ones who noticed what others missed. Their murmurs drifted through the air like smoke. This test might not be about Catherine at all. The more she listened, the sharper the rumors became. Some whispered that the DNA test was designed to trace her bloodline back to Diana, not to confirm Catherine's own health.
Can you tell me if there's any possibility? But I'm not going to say anything, babe.
Others claimed Diana herself had once hinted at a secret, something she had kept close, something the monarchy had known but buried, waiting for the right time to be revealed. Catherine thought of the fragments she had encountered over the years, the photographs of a woman smiling through heartbreak, the interviews filled with quiet pain, the letters released after Diana's death.
There was this sea of flowers. So many people traveled to London.
Each of them had felt isolated, like broken pieces of a larger puzzle. Now, disturbingly, they seemed to fit together in ways she had never dared to consider. The realization unsettled her deeply. If the whispers were true, this was not about her at all. It was about Diana, and something she had carried silently, hidden away until it could no longer be contained. Could this DNA test be the key to unlocking the truth Diana had never spoken aloud? Could a simple vial of blood finally force the monarchy to confront what it had concealed for decades? Could this single test be the spark that unravels decades of royal secrecy and finally reveal the truth Diana took to her grave? The envelope of truth. It was a truth long buried beneath years of silence, a question that refused to rest, gnawing at Catherine's thoughts like a quiet storm she could not escape. The night before the results were due, sleep abandoned her entirely. She drifted through the dim corridors of Kensington Palace, her footsteps soft yet echoing against the marble floors, carrying the weight of uncertainty. The palace was still, but her mind was not. Every shadow seemed alive. Every whisper of the wind sounded like the faint memory of another woman's presence. For a fleeting moment, Catherine could almost feel Diana beside her, graceful, radiant, but burdened by the same invisible chains.
These relationships that are founded in the earliest years of our lives.
The thought sent a shiver down her spine. She tried to dismiss it, convincing herself it was exhaustion playing tricks on her mind. Yet deep within, she sensed something more, a connection, an unspoken pull between two women bound by fate and the heavy expectations of the crown. Diana's story had never truly ended. Perhaps it had only been waiting for this moment to surface again. Catherine's thoughts spiraled through the endless possibilities. If the DNA test was truly tied to Diana's past, what would it reveal? What secret had been sealed away for so long that the monarchy dared not speak its name? The question tightened around her heart, making it hard to breathe.
How tragic the death of Lord Mountbatten was, and how sorry she felt for Charles and his entire family.
When morning came, the silence was broken by the soft knock on her door. A single envelope was handed to her, plain, official, unmarked except for the royal insignia. Yet its weight felt immense, almost unnatural, as if the entire legacy of the royal family was folded inside. Catherine's hands trembled as she held it. She had waited for this moment, But now that it was here, fear eclipsed every other emotion. She sat down, staring at the envelope for what felt like eternity. This wasn't just a document. It was a reckoning. Whatever truth it contained could alter her life, her marriage, even the monarchy itself. Slowly, she broke the seal.
Talk about their mental health, but actually understand ways in which we can also look after it.
The paper inside was crisp, the words cold and clinical. Her eyes scanned the lines, but her mind lagged, trying to process what they meant. Each sentence seemed to carry a weight far beyond science, beyond medicine. It was history revealing itself in black ink. As the realization settled in, a wave of dread washed over her. The results confirmed what she had feared all along. This wasn't just about her. It was about Diana. And it was about a truth the palace had spent decades trying to keep buried. And how did one sealed envelope come to threaten everything? Love, legacy, and the monarchy itself. Keep watching. The bloodline that shook the crown. The words on the page blurred before Catherine's eyes, but their meaning was unmistakable. The DNA results had revealed something far more explosive than anyone could have imagined. It wasn't a question of health or routine lineage. It was a revelation that threatened to rewrite royal history itself. The test confirmed a direct connection to Diana, one that went far beyond what had ever been publicly known. It was as if the past had reached out through the bloodline, forcing the truth to surface after decades of silence. Catherine's hands trembled as she read the clinical sentences that carried such devastating power. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat heavier than the last. She thought of William, of the quiet stories he had shared about his mother, the loneliness that had haunted her.
In reality, she was chastised by the media and stifled by the conservative royal family.
The isolation that had consumed her behind palace walls. Those had always been painful memories, but distant ones, softened by time. Now, holding the evidence in her hands, Catherine felt the full weight of that pain in a way she never had before. She remembered the whispers that had followed Diana for years, the talk of paranoia, the rumors that she felt watched, trapped, and betrayed from within. Catherine had always dismissed them as part of the media's relentless narrative, exaggerations born of scandal and sorrow. But now, with these results staring back at her, those old rumors seemed terrifyingly real. They weren't just fragments of gossip, they were signs, warnings, of something darker that had long been buried beneath royal decorum. The implications were staggering. What did this mean for William, for their children, for the very institution she had sworn to serve? For years, the palace had controlled Diana's story, presenting her to the world as a tragic figure, a victim of heartbreak, of media cruelty, of her own vulnerability. But what if that narrative had been only part of the truth? What if there had been something more? Something that the monarchy,
Diana did have difficulties, there's no question. I mean, she certainly suffered.
Had known but kept hidden to protect itself. A chill ran down Catherine's spine as her mind began to piece the fragments together. The secrecy surrounding the test, the guarded faces of the medical staff, the sealed files that were never explained. None of it had been random. Everything pointed to a deliberate effort to keep the truth contained. The thought that the monarchy itself might have been aware of this connection all along was almost unbearable. She had always believed in the power of duty, in the sanctity of tradition, in the idea that the crown existed above corruption and deceit. But now that faith began to crumble. The monarchy had protected its image for generations. But Catherine could no longer ignore the cost. How many lives had been broken? How many truths buried in the name of preservation? And as she sat there, the results trembling in her hands, she understood that this was no longer just about Diana's legacy. It was about the future of the entire royal family, and the dangerous truth now pulsing within her own blood. But what if the silence shielding the crown was never protection, but betrayal? How many hidden truths could still remain unspoken? Stay tuned. The cost of silence. This was never just about a medical file or a clinical test. It was about truth. Truth that had been buried under layers of secrecy, carefully guarded by walls of silence, deception, and tradition. And now, Catherine found herself holding the key to that truth in her trembling hands. The weight of it was overwhelming, almost suffocating, for she knew that unlocking it would not only expose the past, but also reshape the future of the crown itself. Her mind kept returning to Diana, her words, her fears, her quiet confessions during those final years. William had shared fragments of his mother's anguish, her sense that eyes were always on her. That betrayal lurked in every corner of the palace. Catherine had once brushed those stories aside, convinced they were the cries of a woman broken by heartbreak and hounded by the press. But now, with the DNA results in front of her, she understood them differently. They weren't just the outpourings of a wounded soul.
Because we haven't yet met her yet, so hopefully that will be soon.
They were warnings, urgent, prophetic signs of a truth deliberately hidden from the world. The days that followed were heavy with unease. Catherine wandered through the palace halls, her thoughts restless, her heart uneasy. Each corridor seemed haunted by the shadows of the past, every portrait and gilded frame whispering of Diana's silenced voice. The air itself felt charged, as if the walls carried the memory of a woman who had been reshaped by others' narratives, her story rewritten until the truth was almost unrecognizable. Catherine felt the press of that silence, and for the first time, she realized she could no longer carry it quietly. But clarity came with dread, revealing what she had discovered would not be simple. It would come at an immense cost. The monarchy had always survived on silence, on the principle that duty outweighed emotion, that appearances mattered more than truth, that silence had cost Diana her peace, her dignity, and ultimately, her voice. And now, Catherine understood it was threatening to cost her own peace as well.
It's so fantastic. Not only does this come from a single patient's sort of personal experience, but actually...
She sat alone one evening, the papers still fresh in her memory, and the weight of decision settled over her. To reveal the truth would mean pulling down the walls carefully built to protect the institution. It would mean challenging centuries of tradition and risking everything she had sworn to uphold. And yet, even in her fear, a quiet determination rose within her. Catherine knew she could no longer remain a silent witness to the monarchy's narrative. The truth demanded to be heard. It was the only way to honor Diana, not as the carefully crafted image of a tragic figure, but as a woman whose life, pain, and warnings carried meaning far deeper than the palace ever allowed. In that quiet resolve, Catherine made a vow to herself. Diana's truth would not be buried again. No matter the cost, no matter the storm that followed, she would ensure the walls built to shield the monarchy could no longer hide what was finally ready to be revealed. And how did one woman's vow to reveal Diana's buried truth ignite a storm powerful enough to shake the crown itself? Stay glued. The crown beneath the shadow of secrets. As the weight of truth pressed harder on Catherine's shoulders, the walls of her world seemed to close in. What had begun as a simple medical procedure, one test, tucked discreetly into the private rituals of palace life, was no longer small or private. It had transformed into something that threatened the very pillars of the monarchy itself. Catherine had expected answers, but what she held now was not just personal knowledge. It was dynamite, and once released, it would leave nothing untouched. The DNA test, once thought to concern only her, was quickly revealed to be something much larger, something inseparably tied to Diana's bloodline. The whispers began in the quiet corners of the palace, among staff who overheard fragments of hushed conversations, who noticed sealed envelopes moving under tight guard. They spoke of a secret the royal family had tried to keep buried, a truth that could unravel the carefully crafted image the monarchy had clung to for generations. Catherine could feel the tension everywhere she walked, each hallway echoing with suspicion, every room heavy with the weight of what had been hidden. She knew the royal family's unwritten code: silence at all costs. Appearances mattered more than reality. Smiles, ceremonies, and carefully choreographed moments were the currency of their survival. But this was not a matter of public gossip or fleeting scandal. This was a reckoning. This was history catching up. Behind the velvet curtains, advisors scrambled to seize control of the story before it slipped beyond their grasp. They understood what Catherine held in her hands, the proof that could make rumor into fact, speculation into revelation. They feared not for Diana's memory, nor even for the monarchy's endurance, but for their own positions, their own grasp on power. The machinery of the palace moved swiftly, sending envoys to her private chambers, pleading with her to remain silent. They framed their appeals in the language of duty, her children's future, the stability of the crown, the continuity of tradition. Each word was designed to bind her tighter to silence, to remind her of what she stood to lose if she dared to act.
For all the wonderful messages of support and for your understanding.
But Catherine could hear the hollow ring in their arguments. She could see the desperation etched in their faces, the panic behind their polished words. They were not protecting the monarchy. They were protecting themselves. Every attempt to weigh her down with guilt only fueled her resolve. The pressure grew unbearable. With each passing day, the whispers thickened, circling her like vultures. Every step through the palace corridors reminded her of Diana's silenced voice, of secrets that had been hidden, not for dignity, but for control. Catherine felt the palace walls not as protection, but as a prison. She knew she could not allow herself to become another silent witness to history's cover-up. In the quiet of her reflection, Catherine's vow echoed with unshakable force. This truth would not be buried again, not while she had the power to bring it into the light. And what did Catherine uncover that was so powerful, so forbidden? It threatened to shatter the monarchy's illusion forever. The fracture within the crown. In the thick of this growing storm, William stood at a breaking point, torn between his duty to the crown and his devotion to Catherine. For years, he had been trained to separate the man from the monarch, to put the institution above all else. But this was different. This was no ceremonial dilemma or political misstep. This was about truth, a truth that threatened to shatter everything his family had built and everything he had been taught to protect. The palace had made its expectations painfully clear. Silence must prevail. Tradition demanded loyalty.
The Earthshot Prize, the biggest, global environment prize in history.
Appearances, not emotions, must guide his choices. Yet within William, two worlds collided: the loyal son of the monarchy and the grieving son of Diana. His mother's memory was no longer just a matter of the heart. It had become a battle line between truth and control. How could he honor the institution that had failed her? How could he look at Catherine, knowing she now held in her hands the very evidence that might expose that failure? The corridors of the palace had grown colder in recent days, their quiet filled with unspoken tension. Advisors moved like shadows, whispering behind closed doors, keeping careful watch on Catherine's every step. They treated her not as a member of the royal family, but as a threat. Every decision she made, every conversation she held, was observed and analyzed. The fear was palpable, fear that she might speak, fear that the truth might escape the gilded walls that had concealed so many royal secrets. William saw it too, the paranoia, the tightening control, the way silence was being used as a weapon. He wanted to protect Catherine, to shield her from the suffocating scrutiny closing in on her. Yet he knew that the truth she carried could not stay hidden forever. It was too powerful, too dangerous to suppress, and deep down, he understood that the monarchy's carefully guarded foundation, built on secrecy and unquestioned obedience, was beginning to crack beneath the weight of its own lies. Then, one evening, when the tension inside the palace felt almost unbearable, Catherine sat alone with the envelope once more. The same envelope that had changed everything. Days had passed since she had opened it, but its contents still haunted her every thought. The paper inside carried not just information, it carried reckoning. She knew that sharing it with William would break him, forcing him to face truths about his mother, his family, and himself that he had spent his life avoiding. But she also knew he deserved nothing less than honesty. When she finally handed him the results, the silence that followed was heavier than any words could bear. William's face drained of color as his eyes scanned the page. Disbelief clouded his expression. He blinked as though hoping the words might vanish, that the truth might dissolve into another cruel rumor, but it didn't. The evidence was undeniable, the facts cold and immovable. He pushed the envelope away, as though distance could undo what he had seen. Yet the truth stayed, unrelenting, immovable, and now alive between them, threatening to upend the world they both had sworn to defend. So, what did those cold, clinical words reveal? A truth too dangerous to exist, or a secret too sacred to stay hidden? You won't want to miss this part. The reckoning of silence. The truth, once uncovered, refused to be buried again. What began as a discreet medical test, a quiet inquiry into the past, exploded into a royal reckoning. Catherine and William realized they had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. The DNA test shattered not only the illusion of royal unity, but also unearthed a hidden chapter of Diana's life, her pain, her strength, and the legacy the palace had long tried to suppress. Catherine could feel history weighing upon her. What she had once considered private knowledge now carried the power to alter the monarchy itself.
Amazingly close. Yeah. And yes, you know.
For years, she had accepted scrutiny, endured whispers, and played the role expected of her. But this was no performance. This was truth fighting for air in a kingdom built on silence. And that silence was cracking. Rumors spread through the palace like wildfire. Whispers became headlines. Headlines became a global storm. Questions roared across the media. What had the DNA revealed? What did Diana suffer in silence? And what had the monarchy hidden to preserve its image? Courtiers and advisors scrambled, desperate to regain control. They had faced scandals before, affairs, divorces, even abdication, but never a revelation that threatened the very foundation of royal secrecy. At the heart of the storm stood Catherine, torn between loyalty and conscience. Should she uphold the ancient code of silence, or expose everything and let the monarchy face its reckoning? For William, the truth cut even deeper. The revelations struck at his identity, his upbringing, and the memory of his mother, a woman sacrificed on the altar of duty. He had been taught that silence was strength, but now he saw it for what it was, the weapon that had destroyed Diana's peace.
As I said, many end up on the streets as a last resort.
The palace advisors cloaked their fear in the language of duty, warning that exposure would destroy the crown and endanger their children's future. But Catherine and William saw through the deception. The advisors weren't defending the monarchy, they were defending themselves. The couple realized that this was no longer a question of protocol, it was a battle for truth. Finally, the choice became clear. They would not remain silent. Together, they broke the wall of secrecy that had defined royal life for generations. The DNA results and the truths they carried became public. Diana's story, once buried beneath decades of denial, was allowed to breathe. The monarchy stood exposed, trembling under the weight of its past. Yet within that vulnerability lay something powerful: humanity. For the first time, the royal family confronted its own ghosts. Diana's voice, once silenced, was restored to history. And though Catherine and William knew the crown might never be the same, they understood something deeper: that truth, however dangerous, was the only path to redemption. In choosing honesty over silence, they didn't just honor Diana's memory, they redefined what it truly means to wear the crown. So what do you think? Has Catherine's revelation finally set Diana's spirit free? Or has it awakened a storm the monarchy can never escape? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.